Welcome to 3 Point Cyber, a podcast about cybersecurity topics and events for the layperson. The ideas, opinions, and discussions of this podcast are those of the host, co-host, and guest, and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers or affiliates. Recording and propagation of this podcast is highly encouraged as long as an acknowledgement is given to the ownership. Music and graphics used in the podcast and promotional materials cannot be used in other events not tied to the podcast without the express written consent from Alpha Omega Advisors. On another podcast from 3 Point Cyber. Andrew, are you ready to go with this one?
Absolutely. Dobry wieczór, as they say here in Poland, which is good evening. I have not been practicing my Polish on these podcasts, I just realized.
No, you haven't been. I'm kind of glad because I have no idea what you're saying. And you could be saying anything, and then I would get into trouble later for it. So
True. Yeah. Hey, I got to tell you, I heard that you did call your niece.
I did.
My sister, and we are going to have my nephew on
a future podcast. His name is Trey, and he is he basically started college this past year, and he started off into computer science and realized that that's not something he really likes, and he was kind of curious as to what he could move over his major to, and he decided he would like to go into cybersecurity. So, and I heard this, and knowing that he had a lot of questions about it and needs to speak with someone and he needs to get proper guidance because that seems to be lacking in today's going into college, going into university. Kids just have no idea what they really want to do, and they're going in and taking all these classes with a boatload of debt only to come out and decide they don't even want to do what they just studied. So hopefully, here's the idea. We're going to bring Trey on in a future episode, and we're going to introduce him to you. And we're going to have a discussion, and we're just going to open up the discussion with him for all the questions he would possibly like to have about cyber to me, and hopefully we can lead him in the right direction. And then hopefully by that dialogue, we can have some other people learn a little bit about what they need to be doing if they're going to take this road down into the cyber learning area.
Absolutely. And I told Becca, my sister, that I would be sure to express that learning does not end at college, because he's a little concerned that he's getting a slow start in life. But I think a lot of young people need to understand that college, when college ends, you keep
learning.
If you want to succeed, you keep learning.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, Andrew, but the very last thing I say at the end of this podcast when we close it out is keep on learning. That is so very, very important. I can tell you there's not a day go by that I haven't learned something new, specifically in the cyber field. And that typically what you find is you find a passion for a field, you're always going to keep learning about that field. There's no one on earth that knows everything about everything. I could even say it even better than this. There's no one on earth that knows everything about one thing. They may know a lot, but they do not know everything, and they will be the first to admit they keep learning. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. I'm also looking very forward to the discussion that we're going to have today. This gentleman I met a few years back at a conference in New York City, and he had a team with him. He gave a presentation, but he also had a team with him that I found just fascinating and was very intrigued by what they were working with. The gentleman's name today is Edwin Doyle. He goes by Eddie. He is the global cybersecurity strategist for Checkpoint Software and a keynote speaker. Eddie goes around quite a bit, and he talks at a lot of conferences, and he does keynote addresses. He's very good, and I just absolutely love listening to him. Eddie is regularly featured as an expert in our field, leading media outlets and analysis via keynote addresses, like I mentioned, panel discussions and interviews, and podcasts like ours. So, again, as I mentioned, I'd met him before. The team there they gave a demonstration of how that research team at Checkpoint Research had actually hacked the home robot, the vacuum robot, and how they could how you could actually use that robot to do a lot of things of recon, of mapping out an area, mapping out the floor area, and even some of these robots had cameras on them, and some of them still do have cameras on them, and how you could turn the camera on and see what's going on inside, whatever location that robot is at. But in any case, wow. That's what I found intriguing, and I really liked that presentation. I think at the time they were also getting ready to announce, which I know they did, and I remember reading about it, but at that time, that same research team was getting ready to announce how they hacked a drone aircraft. So that was pretty cool. So wow. In just a few minutes, we're going to bring Eddie on, so stay with us. So here we are now with Eddie Doyle. Eddie, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast, and we're going to have a pretty good conversation. Hopefully I got some great questions to ask, and if there's anything else that Andrew would like to ask, you know he's going to do it. He's going to pop in right over top of me and say, hey, Dave, I got more important questions than you do. Here we are.
There's only so much time in these podcasts.
I know. And it goes by quick. So let's move right on to it. Eddie, thanks much. Appreciate it.
Dave and Andrew, thanks for having me. It's going to be great. Looking forward to this.
Mm-hmm. So, Eddie, as I was looking a little bit about some of the things you've been doing here lately, one of the pieces that I pulled up, you posted on LinkedIn. Actually, no, you did with NASA, Cyber Security Awareness Month with NASA.
Mm-hmm.
You made a comment on your media page for this that caught my attention because I actually used the same quote when I'm kind of doing some things as well. And it's an Albert Einstein quote. Do you recall what you brought up?
Was it the one about imagination, more powerful than knowledge, that one?
Close. No, this was what Albert Einstein said. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I like that. That's a great thing here, and especially with cyber, because we tend to create our own problems in cyber. So why don't you explain a little bit about what you were meaning by that?
Well, it was kind of interesting because I'd done a talk, I think in 2018, and the CISO for NASA was in the audience. And about 2 or 3 months later, he gave me a call. He said, hey, I was in the crowd. We didn't meet, but he said, I've got a problem here. I've got Cyber Awareness Month coming up, and I have a real challenge. I'm trying to get people to actually just listen to me. Now, the problem for me is that I'm working with literal rocket scientists, so they know everything. And I thought, well, yeah, that is a unique problem. How am I going to help you? I'm not a rocket scientist. So I put together what I thought was a very clever, presentation talking about actually architecture and anthropology, because I thought I'm not talking to these guys about technology. They run circles around me, and then tied it into cybersecurity hygiene. And what I mean by, going in with the same thinking, even if you're a rocket scientist, doesn't matter how many PhDs you've got, if you go into a problem with the same thinking, you are not going to provide an adequate solution. Now, here's a great example. Passwords. Alphanumeric passwords. Haven't those been a nightmare? So there was an op-ed in the New York Times, probably about 10 years ago now, of the guy that gave us this problem. And it was an apology letter. I'm serious. He wrote an apology because this is a data scientist, a linguistics expert with probably PhDs, after his name. And he was given a challenge. Hey, with a QWERTY keyboard, so with the standard keyboard, create the most difficult thing that you think a computer could hack. And so he comes up with, one cap, at least capital letters, lower cap, numbers, symbols. And guess what? He's a scientist, so he can think in those kinds of ways. I've got friends and colleagues that will remember my IP address before they remember my name. Now, those people are a very small subset of humans, and they tend to work in these deep labs that you spoke about in the introduction, hacking drones and the such like. And so those people can remember that, but the majority of others cannot. So what did they do? They resorted to putting sticky notes on their computers, using the same password everywhere, or just generally having a nightmarish problem where you can't cope in the online world. It's since been proven, I think it was the Columbia University proved this, that a passphrase is more secure than an 8-digit alphanumeric password, and it's easier to remember. So as an example, this is Eddie's password that can never be broken. I don't know how many letters are in that, but it's a lot. So to brute force that password would take a lot more compute strength than it would an alphanumeric 8-digit password. Plus, I can remember this is Eddie's password, which can never be broken. So here's a little tip for your listeners, okay? I'm going to solve your password problems right now. Should we do this?
Sure, that would be awesome.
One of the largest challenges in the world, and here I am claiming I can solve it. So in the English language, every word has a vowel or a vowel sound. A-E-I-O-U. That's just 5. So in your head, dear listeners, just replace A-E-I-O-U with an arbitrary number, letter, symbol. Now you will remember that. Let's say A is the exclamation point. All right, just remember that A is always exclamation point. So when you type in, this is Eddie's password, which can never be broken, every time the letter A comes up, you're typing in the pound key. Now you can remember the password and you're satisfying this crazy rule that we gave everybody for alphanumeric. And then for each word, just at the beginning of each word, put a capital letter. There you go. You've just satisfied it for all of the machines out there, and you only have to remember 5 digits.
Wow. Well, that is great. I'm going to definitely remember that one.
I think we can probably end this podcast and go make a fortune.
Yes. We just solved all the world's problems.
Now I just hope I don't have to write that phrase for real for somebody, because then they won't understand what I'm writing.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
Actually, what you did, Eddie, was just now Andrew's probably going to go change his password, and I can no longer get into his bank account.
That's right.
So, I was when I was talking with someone this past week, someone, again, not in cyber, always has these questions, and they've been intrigued by the podcast as well, and they've been listening, which I'm very thankful for, that it is actually reaching non-cyber people, and that's what I really like.
Right.
But the thing that this person brought up was the fact that they're still not quite understanding just how vulnerable the everyday person is. Because in the news, you're not hearing attacks on individuals. You're hearing attacks on companies because they get the idea that hackers are going after companies because of money or whatever else reason they may want to go after that company. Eddie, in what you've been doing and going out and speaking with and the people you're coming across, just how vulnerable is the everyday person?
So what we call script kiddies, these are the junior threat actors, right? These are the people that they're generally teenagers, and they're maybe a little bit older, or somebody who doesn't have that greater skill set. They sort of want to get into the game, right? They obviously don't have any ethics. They're motivated by money. These are the ones, and there's a plethora of them, so there's lots of them. So these are the ones taking shots out there. And the reason why people are always going to be vulnerable to this plethora of threat actors is because a threat actor only needs to be right once. There's no penalty for a threat actor being wrong. What I mean by that is, if somebody wants to try out their skill set and they want to steal from people, they're going to write scripts. They're going to change hashes of various signatures so that they can bypass people's elementary security on their, let's say, mobile device or on their home networks. And that malware is out on the internet and it never sleeps. So there's no penalty for that threat actor after they've created the malware, they've created the attack, to just let it loose and see what happens. As an individual, you need to be right 100% of the time. There is massive penalty for you being wrong. So the odds are stacked against you in this game, in this warfare, right? So just remember that the threat actors only need to be right once. There's no penalty for being wrong. You need to be right 100% of the time. There's massive penalty for being wrong once. And the fact that, software doesn't sleep. So, so the original worms from the 1980s, they're still out there, right? I mean, they're still, worming their way through the internet. These things don't die, right? It's code that's working. And so I think that's probably the largest prevalent message that you need to understand in order to be vigilant. And then, of course, you have the organized crime, right? And these are cybercrime syndicates now. We started to break down these groups a few years ago. It was very interesting through our research team. We find a lot of the threats coming from Eastern Europe, former USSR countries mostly. China and North Korea tend to be more nation state, so they're bigger groups. There are some groups in Eastern Europe that have now grouped together and become a syndicate. And what we've noticed is that some people have great skill sets with algorithms. And so the kingpin, as it were, in a cybercrime syndicate will source that person and grab that skill set. Then there's somebody else that's pretty good at, getting through social engineering, right? Getting somebody's password, social engineering somebody. So we're starting to see that cybercrime organizations are coming together with somebody coordinating at the top, and they can find these skill sets anywhere in the world. And this actually leads interesting. Now I'm going to pivot, but bring me back if you don't think I'm finished with this conversation. When I said they find allies, these cybercrime folks anywhere in the world, look what just happened when the president of the Ukraine about 6 weeks ago said, hey, general population, can you help me with the cyber fight against Russia? Well, 200,000 people signed up to a Telegram account in 1 week. It's now at about 450,000. And David, Andrew, I'm still trying to formulate an opinion here because this has never really happened before. We're talking about private citizens and also corporations like Facebook and the such like, all weighing in on an international war between two countries. this is very strange to me. I'm not making a judgment call as to saying they should or shouldn't. I'm simply saying, scary for sure for everybody to do this. And I think the majority of people who are doing this, jumping in on this thing, they probably feel they've got some kind of moral high ground, and yet it's a lot more complicated than people think.
Yeah.
I would be slow to get involved in other countries' affairs like that if I'm an individual. And you know, the other part I think that motivates them, and I'm probably going to get smacked for this online, but the other part that motivates them is a lot of these guys, shall we say, if you've got a very high technical skill set, but very low social skills, you're in a basement somewhere. You're probably not earning good coin at a high-end corporation. Your skill set is therefore, quote, to waste. And it probably makes them feel great to weigh in and use that skill set in some kind of, you know, vigilant, righteous manner like this. So, well, you know, it's very odd, fellas.
And I would agree with you, Eddie, because I think you're right. People want to be heard. And if that's the way they can be heard, that's what they're going to jump in on. Now, I'm more curious as to what all these 200,000 people could actually do. I mean, how do you even, how do you coordinate 200,000 people? What's the ask? You know, if I'm signing up, what's the ask?
It's 450,000 the last time I counted, and that was about 2 weeks ago. So I imagine it's probably over 500,000 now. So here's what they're doing. You've got groups like Anonymous that are already very well organized. So those folks, I don't know exactly how they communicate and do it. You know, Signal, Telegram, these kinds of encrypted accounts, they probably, you know, use communication platforms like that. They've clearly been successful. And it's an irony, isn't it? Because here I am stating an opinion where I'd be slow, but on other occasions, Anonymous have done things where you think, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm pleased they did that. But again, we are taking law enforcement and in the case of Russia and Ukraine, military engagement as a citizen. And that's a very odd thing to do. At any rate, what they are doing, though, is they had shut down 3 Russian leading media outlets only for a number of hours. They had disrupted the supply chain of grocery stores. And do you know now, 1 in every 5 individuals who is breached is Russian today. And we're talking about Russian citizens. In a sense, I feel like we're punishing the wrong people there.
Yeah.
So 1 in 5 people that are hacked in cyber are Russian today.
Yeah.
That's huge.
You know, I think by the numbers, I see where the possibility of doing denial of services, that many people. I mean, if you could imagine having 450,000 people all at once hitting a specific site, which is, you know, that I understand. But I'm not convinced that all 450,000 of these people are quite capable enough to launch their own cyber attack.
Right. Not a well-oiled machine, to be sure, but, you know, they get more than lucky. And as I say, they've taken down a few grocery stores and media outlets and disrupted transportation.
Well, that is a great point that I had not considered, because, you know, anytime a conflict happens, you have to, or supposed to, look at, you know, what does the end of this look like? You know, what about after conflict? And if we have 450,000 hackers out there who are now organized that we consider doing a good thing at some point, you know, what does it look like after this is done?
Yeah, what are they going to do when the war ends and now they're ready to move on to what's next?
Yeah, it's kind of like arming guerrillas. You know, they may be on your side now, but you never know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, one more thing that you brought up, I liked where we went, but one thing I was also reading, Zelensky being in the news a lot and always on that, you see him on his screen, and that's how he speaks to the world, basically always sitting in front of the camera like we are right now, you know, talking to each other. But I've heard that he's now created a problem for himself in the potential of some really good deep fake videos of himself asking for stuff, just because of the way he presents himself. Those are always the best way to do deep fakes, because I could actually see some damage coming out with some deep fake videos of him saying certain things that he didn't actually say. So that's always an idea as well. It's amazing how technology can actually change the course of a lot of things, and we're probably seeing technology starting to play a big role in all of this, you know, going on over there.
You know that's already happened at least once. Zelensky being deep fake.
Deep fake. Oh, is that right? I hadn't seen that yet. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if some really good ones will be coming out more and more, because that's just how the technologists work. If they get it through and they get a good result, they're going to continue hitting it until something else happens. So let's come back back to the individual again, because I'm really starting to feel the pain of some of the people that don't know what to do. They see all this stuff, they hear all of this stuff. Almost there for a while, we were just bombarded with cyber attacks in the news and through COVID, and people were hit up just by their own IT and security departments at companies saying, you've got to be extra careful because now you're working from home, which brought on a whole new set of problems, for us in the security industry. But the problem is we haven't traditionally done a very good job of explaining what are the new problems and how do you recognize them. So in that respect, what kind of cyber hygiene tips can we start giving our individuals, individual users, with stuff with people at home? What can we do?
So the majority of attacks come through social engineering phishing, right? These are a phishing email. I think it's 81% was the last count that I read of penetration comes from an email phishing campaign of some kind. So people have to be vigilant about social engineering. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. What is social engineering? Social engineering is the art of deception. So think Machiavelli, think Sun Tzu in The Art of War. In a sense, we have already been quite well trained to resist social engineering prior to the computer era. So if you think of kids, right, don't talk to strangers, these kinds of things. If, beware of beware of friends offering gifts, or maybe it's enemies offering gifts. That's the Sun Tzu quote. When you're socially engineered, there's generally a subset of attack vectors that a threat actor will use. One, they will use authority. So they will pretend, they'll have pretext that they are in authority. So it could be an email from, the police. It could be an email from your boss at work. If you're being targeted, this is what it would certainly be. And people, that's an interesting one too, because people are like, well, I'm not targeted. If you work in the Department of Finance at a corporation, you're of interest to people. So let's just stick with the person in the Department of Finance at a corporation. So that person is likely going to be targeted through, this is your boss, this is the CEO, and we want to change some banking details, right? I need you to forward this, I'm away. And here's what you can do to stop that kind of thing from happening. People post on Facebook and LinkedIn all the time where they're going. So the CEO says, hey, I'm going to Malaysia for a trip, blah, blah, blah. It's all out there, right? Free of charge. So let's not do that. Let's not offer up the threat actors the information about our lives. We've got a wife and a dog and all this. So because otherwise, when a threat actor jumps into an email and starts impersonating an authority, they're going to speak like that authority. They're going to mention their spouse's name or their dog's name, etc. They're going to say, I'm in Malaysia right now. And so they'll use this kind of pretexting with a position of authority to get the person to kind of sweat a little bit, right? Now, the other thing they'll also do is create urgency, right? So I need this transfer immediately. I've got to get a plane ticket from Malaysia to Sydney. I've got this really important meeting. Send $10,000 right now. So here's a little tip for anybody that works in the Department of Finance. Now, we're talking about business email compromise, which the FBI says is a $7 billion a year. $7 billion a year is lost from business email compromise. And the tip for people in the Department of Finance, if ever you're dealing with money, you just need to forget the reply button on email. And what I mean by that is, if somebody has sent you an email saying, this is your boss, I'm in Malaysia, whatever, don't hit reply because you're replying to a spoofed email address. You don't know it because you're not looking, right? So what you do is you click forward and you type in the known trusted email address of the person you've been emailing for the last 10 years. Then if it is spoofed, that person's going to look at this and think, well, what the heck is this, right? So that's one little tip. And it's okay, so it takes an extra 3 seconds of your day. But that's what you've got to do. Just hit forward and type in the known email. If you're responsible for money, the one thing you need to remember from this show is forget the reply button, click forward, type in the known and trusted email address, and you'll eliminate probably 80% of business email compromises just from that little tip alone. And then along with the password tip, we've got you covered here today.
Yeah, very good. Those are two excellent points. I think in everything that I've seen over the past few years, social media has played a huge part in the targeting of individuals because it's a plethora of information about anyone that's on social media. And you actually put out an article last week on LinkedIn.
Right.
LinkedIn's a little secret. I pulled out one quote you have in there. You had 4 points. fourth point I absolutely loved, and I'm going to read it to everyone right now, and that is regularly refresh your knowledge pertaining to the latest social media scams. Once you've refreshed your knowledge, educate those around you. And I think that is so important because you have to constantly understand what's really out there. And when you find a good scam or a scam that is attempted to come onto you, you need to be letting everyone else know around you, specifically your other family members, because that's the only way we're going to beat this thing.
Right, and you reminded me, so last year, the most imitated brands were Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and WhatsApp. Mm-hmm. They're still in the top 5, but just the leadership position just got taken 2 weeks ago by LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is now the #1 most imitated brand for threat actors to hack you. It makes sense because in Facebook, if you're a threat actor, Facebook is kind of like a crapshoot, right? You might hit a rich guy, you might hit somebody who's got no money at all, and you've encrypted their files in ransomware, and they're not paying you a penny because they haven't got any money. But if you go on LinkedIn and you target people, more than likely they're a professional that's got a couple of extra bucks. So LinkedIn is now the #1 most spoofed brand for threat actors. Also, if you go to LinkedIn and you type in whoever on LinkedIn, there's a little contact details button. Now you go to my LinkedIn page, you click contact details, and all that comes up is my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn, nothing. But most people don't know how to obfuscate. It's just a little toggle button to keep it private, their email address and their phone number, which LinkedIn asks you for. So if you go to LinkedIn profiles, and this is what threat actors do all the time, typically in LinkedIn, you put your personal email address because people want to get headhunted, right, to different companies. So they don't put in their work email. So now a threat actor's got your personal email address, where you work, where you're going for all your various trips because you tell people, and your phone number. Yeah.
Yeah. Email. There's a lot I can say about email addresses. It's amazing how much information you can get off someone just by an email address. Because they don't,
emails are a cockroach that just won't die. It's a
yeah.
terrible form of communication. We should just get rid of it, but it's there.
Yep, it's exactly right. And then you get into problems of people wanting to use their email systems as document storage systems, and you got all kinds of other problems. So that's why it's just a treasure trove of information. If the threat actor can hack into your email account, they can get a lot of information from you. Specifically, if you're doing a lot of banking or just general business over your own personal email account.
Exactly. And you mentioned a few moments ago, Dave, about cyber hygiene. So I've got a theory on cyber hygiene that I've been sort of hypothesizing for a while. And it actually came out of a white paper I read by a West Point cadet in the US. He wrote a paper and it was called Drilling versus Training. Andrew, you're going to love this, mate. Okay. So this is, here's the abstract of it, as it were. So at the Battle of Gettysburg, it turns out, and this is the most decisive battle in US history, right? So an important one. It turns out that 90% of soldiers did not even discharge their weapon. Now, we know this from the 18,000 fully loaded muskets and issue of bullets next to all the fallen soldiers' bodies. Now, these were poor farm boys that just hunkered down and were fighting a Revolutionary War. I mean, of course, this is understandable. Fast forward to the Vietnam War. The US military had completely reversed that trend where 90% of soldiers ran into a hellfire of bullets and engaged in battle. How? The paper was about drilling, not training. So training is something you get at corporations like, okay, we're going to do cyber hygiene, kind of like I did for NASA, right? Let's go in, let's tickle everybody's ears. Hey, everybody, we're going to be careful, cyber hygiene. Don't forget the reply button, click forward, alphanumeric passwords, passphrases, blah, blah. Everything we're talking about in these podcasts. The problem with training is it has no neuroplastic impact on the mind. Unless you have biological change in your brain, so I'm talking about neuroplasticity, you don't get behavioral change. Now, this is obvious with the military. Why? Because we drill the hell out of people. You know how to strip a weapon in the dark, underwater, back to front, right? Because you've done it 1,000 times and you'll do it another 1,000 times, right? I mean, an extreme example is our Navy SEALs. They train for 18 months for a 6-month deployment. Okay, well, those are extreme examples. So what do we do as a citizenry? Because how can we drill people in cyber hygiene? Well, my hypothesis is this, that 30 seconds of daily drilling is better than 1 full day of training a year. And I'll tell you, even in my own organization, you know, and I'm rather sheepish to admit this, that we have to do training, and there's all sorts of HR training, sexual harassment, all that kind of jazz, right? Now, I'm a decent citizen, so I look at training like that and think, oh, good Lord, do I have to do this? So I go in with a bad attitude. I click through the rather intimidating, slides, or the rather patronizing cartoons that they show me about, you know, don't say horrible things. It's like, really? And so I click through that as fast as possible. I challenge the multiple guess exam because I'm half smart. I pass 100%. I'm compliant, but ask me anything about what that training was. I don't know. I have no idea what that was. Right? But I'm compliant, I passed. It's the same with GDPR, which you're familiar with, probably, Andrew, being around Europe there. So GDPR is the European governance for, I forget what it stands for, but it's the privacy for the citizenry of Europe, for companies like Google and Facebook. You know, you can't sell people's data, this kind of stuff. I have to do GDPR training. Why? Well, I suppose because our general counsel wants to make sure, you know, we've got full compliance and we're, you know, abiding by the law. So I do GDPR training the same way. Why? Because I have no mechanism to spam my customers in Europe. Like, it's really not quite relevant to me. And yet I'm 100% compliant with GDPR. I know nothing about GDPR, not really. So my hypothesis is that if something is super important, like cyber hygiene, okay, then what we should be doing is creating systems to touch our people in corporations, and even as individuals, you need to take this upon yourself, that every day you engineer it into your lifestyle. I'll give you a workout example. So when COVID hit and the gyms all closed, I can go to the gym. And so I bought a couple of bits to use at home, but they kind of sat there and collected dust. And I was a bit annoyed with myself, right? So I thought, gee, how do I do this? I've got a 50-pound medicine ball, right? This big 50-pound ball. You do all sorts of exercises with it. So here's what I do. I've sort of hacked my own workout routine. The ball, now, if we were on camera, I could almost show you. It's 2 feet away from me right now. It's right in the middle of my room. It's annoyingly in the way, and I leave it there. My wife loves that, of course. I leave it there because here's the game. Every time I walk past the ball, I got to pick it up. I got to pick it up. That's the game. And I've got a bar in my basement going to the garage. Every time I walk under the bar, I got to do a pull-up. That's the game. So what happens is, by the end of the day, I've picked up a 50-pound medicine ball probably 30 to 40 times. I've probably done about 20 to 30 pull-ups. Do you know what I mean? I've incorporated working out into my lifestyle. So people that are listening, what you need to do there is, and there's lots of free apps for cyber hygiene and the such like. It's kind of like learning a new language, right? If you just did it once a week, you're never going to be proficient. And that's the problem with cyber hygiene training, right? When you take a course, I don't want to say don't take a course, but when people take a course, they take a course, okay, great, and, you know, I passed the exam, and so now I'm cyber aware or something. Yeah, really, are you? No, not you're not, because you're going to fall back to old habits. You're going to click on links. And the reason why clicking on links is I think always going to be a problem for us is because we are forward momentum creatures, us humans, right? Dopamine drives us to a goal, right? We see things, we want them, we see shiny objects, we want a promotion at work, we want to take the family out, whatever. We are forward-leaning animals. And so to click is to move forward. And so this propensity to keep clicking with our fingers is always going to be there. So that's why I think we need drilling. We need to drill ourselves so that we don't click, so that we do forget the reply button, so that we do all the things that these cyber hygiene programs tell us to do. So my advice would be find a free cyber hygiene app online. There's a plethora of them, and build it into your routine like I do with this 50-pound medicine ball so that you do it every day.
I like that idea, Eddie.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to bring up this, though. You probably should not have your wife to listen to this episode, because if she really knows why you're doing those things, you're going to start finding little things around the house in your way so that you're going to be doing what she wants you to do.
That's right.
But I like that idea. That's a really good idea. I've really not thought about all my cybersecurity awareness trainings in that respect. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that going forward. Appreciate that. Andrew, is there any other things you'd like to bring up?
No, I really love the examples, drilling versus training, right on. In the Army, we have what's called battle drills. We train how to do the battle drills, but then we drill them over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. And it's, a lot of times why we can go into autopilot when we're dead tired. We've only been, getting 2 hours of sleep, if that, because we've just drilled that into our subconsciousness. And I love the example.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back. Andrew and I have had these discussions in the past before. The reason why we have the greatest military in the world is because of all the exercises and drilling that they do. It's everything's second nature, and you take that same concept into any other thing, and you're going to be very good at what you do. So I do appreciate that. I think that's a great tie-in, and how that can go back to that.
When you were talking about the West Point paper and the example of the Civil War at Gettysburg, only 10% fired their rifles. Fast forward to Vietnam, and the rates in firefights were well over 50%, maybe 60, 70%. But here's what's also interesting is that in World War II, they did a study and only 25% fired their weapons in a firefight.
Really?
And they changed they changed how they approached. So they would do target practice with a bullseye. That was the old way of doing it. And they changed that, and they got the pop-up target, silhouette targets, to actually look like human beings. So the old method was, we want you to hit a target so you shoot straight. The new method was, we want you to hit something, and to use the terminology, maybe drill it into your head that you're shooting at a human being. As horrible as that sounds, but that's the theory of why, one of the theories of why the rates of fire increased that dramatically.
It's better simulation. And I've been thinking about that too. It's like, how do we simulate for the general population? Like in my organization, because obviously I work for, the 900-pound gorilla in the cybersecurity space. So we're heavily targeted. So we're pretty heavy at, training and drilling, and, we're pretty resourceful with that. And it's part of our job. So I get it, right? This is what I do for a living. But for somebody who's, not in a cybersecurity business, you're doing other things for 8 hours a day. So, how do we simulate that kind of cyber environment for these people and drill them for, let's say, just 5 minutes a day? That would be much more beneficial than, locking them up for an entire day of training.
And that's the challenge. Yeah.
It's a mighty challenge, because it's a profit and loss issue for the CEO, right? You don't want, if you got an accountant, they should be out billing at $400 an hour.
That's exactly right. And that's why, as a CISO, that's always been the challenge too, is trying to sell something that isn't going to make the company money. It's actually potentially ties up resources. And the challenge is getting them to understand that once you start drilling these things into your users, then the probability of an adverse effect is going to go down. And that's where the money thing comes into play.
Something just popped in my head. So our training is kind of simulate, even for cybersecurity awareness, they try to put you into actual scenarios. You receive an email, this heading from this address kind of thing. And I'm wondering, some teams may do this, but maybe, so this may not be an original idea, but for CISOs to actually send on a daily basis those kind of emails and see who does what.
There are companies that actually do that.
There's phishing simulation companies. But again, if they do it like once a month or once a quarter or once a year, it's not enough. But if you do it every day, then you're going to get an adverse effect from that. So it is a challenge one. One of the things I will say that will help individuals that we haven't mentioned is multi-factor authentication. Why don't we call it something nicer? Because I think that scares people, multi-factor authentication, because it's actually really easy, folks. We can do this now. There's Google Authenticator. So if you just go to Google Authenticator, it's free of charge. There's lots of other authenticators out there. So let's think of a nice word right now so that people aren't intimidated, because I think that's the main reason people don't do it, is because they're scared by the words multi-factor authentication. It's a two-step verification. That's another word that we like to use. So that's nicer. So it's 2 steps to verify that you're a friend, not a foe. That's all that is. And so you go to Google Authenticator, and it asks you not to just, when you're going to enter your password for your Gmail, let's say, it then asks you to take a number from this little app, and it just pushes a number to you. And it's the second step. Just think of 2 steps to get into the doorway of your email or anything that might be out there. And so 2FA, as soon as you put that up, you make the threat actors really work hard, and they're just going to move away. It's the old adage of, if you've got kind of a Fort Knox building around your house, the threat actor is going to go next door.
Exactly.
That's what you got to think of there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we always did too, and I always taught the teams. We make our network as most difficult as you can possibly do for a threat actor to get into your network, and they're not going to bother you as much. They're going to move on to something simpler. They want the low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
They're in it for time as well. They want quick wins. They want the easiest thing to do. They don't want to have to work for it. They just go after those that are easiest to get in.
Yeah, it's not personal for them. They couldn't care if it's you or the next person.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and don't be fooled by this past year when you hear about the hacking groups that have apologized that we didn't realize that who we were hitting, and then we caused all these problems. They don't care. It's not perception from them. Yeah. So really appreciate you, Eddie. It's been a great conversation, fantastic topics, and I'm hoping that we can have you back in possibly a future episode. So again, thanks very much. Really do appreciate it.
Well, listen, it's me that thanks you, because the more that we can get the word out there like this, it's good for everybody. So thank you for the work you're doing. I think podcasts like this are brilliant. And let me know when the episode airs. I'll amplify it over my social media as well. So good luck, everybody.
Thank you very much, and appreciate that. And we're back for the 3-point segment with our guest, Eddie Doyle. He was a very good conversationalist, and he just has a lot of good things to say. And to me, he's just a master of being able to make things simple. Andrew, what did you think about that?
Yeah, it was a great talk. And I have to be careful. I'm sure he is an expert, but his accent made him sound just that much more expertly.
Yeah, I know. The accent does make you really, I wish I had one, and I wish I could even fake one, because if I could fake one, I'd be doing it all the time. I really like it. Yeah, I really enjoy it. So I really enjoyed talking to him. So thank you again for taking the time to come out here and talk with us on this episode. So it's time for the 3 points. Andrew, I'm going to let you kind of lead this off, and we'll talk about our 3 points before we end the episode.
Okay. I think the first that I would lead off was his point about threat actors having to be right only once, while users having to be right 100% of the time.
All the time, yeah. Staying safe and understanding, your environment and your threats and your equipment and your software. It's always important to keep everything up to date, keep yourself up to date. That kind of brings in another idea that he had, and it's refresh your knowledge. And you need to refresh your knowledge often, because the threat landscape changes almost daily, changing out there, and what the threat actors are trying to do and how they're trying to do it. So it's very important that if you're doing, you're trying to exercise cyber hygiene with yourself and your computer, whether at home or at work, you need to be constantly updating yourself and understanding what's going on out in the world. And he's absolutely correct. Threat actors only have to get it right one time, but you've got to be 100% accurate in everything that you're doing to help prevent their actions. Very good. That's good number one. And now we're ready for
number two.
Yeah, we're ready for number two.
So he gave some great simple things to do to improve cybersecurity. So I think number two, to summarize, would be simple precautions can make huge differences in cybersecurity.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah. So, and what he's referring to is when it comes to passwords, make them don't be overcomplicated with them, but make them strong enough to understand and remember, and good password hygiene. Another idea that he gave you is enable multi-factor authentication. It's simple to do. I mean, it's not difficult. You can use free ones out there, and he mentioned Google Authenticator as one of them. And if you don't know what that is and you're not using multi-factor on your products, then you go Google Authenticator and see how that works and get that set up. So that's it. It really is. There's so many simple things you can be doing out there with cyber that can increase your cyber posture. Okay, so let's head toward number three.
Yeah, so for number three, I really like the discussion on drilling versus training. So I would say number three would be that users need to be drilled to where cybersecurity is second nature, as opposed to just training cybersecurity occasionally.
Yeah, I agree with that one. And that was a great part of the conversation as well. And if you've missed that part of the conversation in that episode, kind of go back to that one and listen to Eddie talk about this topic about drilling. And what we're referring to is that, and I'm guilty of this as well, I am absolutely a proponent of security awareness training and training your people about cyber and threats and what's going on in their environment. But training alone is not what is going to get them to change their actions. What he's referring to is drilling making scenario-based stuff and constantly drilling your users so that everything becomes secondhand to them instead of just trying to go through a quick training session or taking a quick test. And I like the idea of what he mentioned that, you can go through, most people at the end of or during their annual training sessions and stuff, it's usually some type of a computer-based training. You're on a web, you're running through quizzes, and you're just going through quizzes real quick, and you're answering the questions just enough to be compliant and get through the things. And then you could actually stop them after they're done and start asking them questions and still realize they don't know what they just did. They know just enough to get through the quizzes, which to me, and his point was valid, that's really worthless training. You really got to get to the users to understand that it's something important that they need to understand, that when it happens, they know what to do and how to handle it. And I really liked that one. So number 3 was a really good one, and I really wrote that one down and identified that as drill versus training. And I think it's a combination of both. You need to do the training, but you need to constantly drill your users about the training that they've just taken. Is that kind of what you were summing that one up to, Andrew?
Absolutely. You just did it much better than I did.
I don't know about that, but we'll go with it. How about that? That was our 3 points for this session with Eddie Doyle, and we, again, really appreciated him taking the time to do this. If you have not heard the whole episode, go back and listen to it. Eddie's got some great pieces of information and great advice there. So any last comments you'd like to make?
Just looking forward to the next one.
Very good. We do have some good ones coming up, so stay tuned. Thank you for listening to 3 Point Cyber, a production from Alpha Omega Advisors. If you have questions about this episode or have a topic for discussion or a guest you would like us to have on, please email us at 3pointcyber@gmail.com. That's 3, the number 3, point, P-O-I-N-T, cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, all one word, 3pointcyber@gmail.com. We encourage you to share this podcast with others. This podcast is owned and produced by Alpha Omega Advisors. The theme song was created by music producer Andrew Van Wert in Nashville, Tennessee. This is Dave Summit, and until next time, keep on learning.